Hi guys, this is Steve Moss, pastor at Boulevard Christian Church. God's mission for us here at Boulevard is really simple. We help people find Jesus and we help people follow Jesus. And our teaching team hopes that this message that you're about to listen to will help you learn to grow and trust Him more than before. If it does, would you consider giving a gift to Boulevard to help us carry out the mission that God has given us? Thanks. We hope your heart is fully open to what God has for you in this message today.
Good morning. It's good to see your bright sunshiny faces on this sunny Sunday, cold and crisp. It's good to see everybody here. Some of you look like you're well rested after spring break. Others of you feel like it looks like you kind of need a vacation after spring break. So we want to welcome those who are joining us online. Glad that you are having us online. It's always amazing to me at times when I see the metrics and places where people are watching us online all over the country. It just kind of blows me away whenever to think that there's that 100 or 200 people each week that join us online each week. Have you ever noticed that sometimes we get stuck in a train of thought that just keeps going through our mind, and whatever is going on around us, we bring everybody back to that particular train of thought that we have going on within our own minds? I mean, we just get stuck on this line, or there's something that's important to us, or maybe it's just something that's going through our mind all the time. This is the beginning of March Madness. It's been kind of maddening for me. I think I enjoyed it a whole lot more when I didn't make out the brackets, and turn them in and things of that nature. Jim Landis has, he's from Topeka, Kansas, and he's all things Kansas sports. And he, for the last year, because the Kansas Jayhawkers did win the NCAA tournament last year. They will not be repeating this year. But he has been wearing T-shirts every day to work, shorts every day. I don't know whether there's underwear Kansas Jayhawkers or not, but it seems like he has so much gear on, he's got it all over the place. And then yesterday happened. So let me just say this for our beloved student pastor, Jim. Do not embarrass him publicly. Keep my example. Don't embarrass him publicly that his Jayhawkers lost yesterday, okay? The Arkansas Razorbacks called the Hogs, and the Hogs ate the Hawks yesterday, so it was a good day all the way around. So not that that's running through my mind any at all, but you know how it goes. My mother-in-law, first the sad news, she's 94, and she had a stroke about a month ago, and so we're kind of battling that within our household, but she kind of gets on this one-track deal too within it. She, before the stroke, she lived in an assisted living up in Tulsa, and she was the domino queen. I mean, she beat everybody in dominoes, and she crushed them with glee in her heart. I mean, she was just intent, and when you called her each day to talk with her, how her day went, it was whether or not she totally annihilated everybody or she just won. She was the domino queen. When new residents came into her assisted living center, if they played domino, the other people would line them up so they could play Lorraine, so she could just crash them with the dominoes left and right. But even though that is always a dominant thing within her thought process, there's another thing that's always in her process. She does something that's kind of interesting when she meets somebody, and my mother-in-law is very outgoing. She's fun to be around. She's the life of the party. She is the party most of the time. And so she when she starts talking to somebody new, she'll ask this question. She's been doing this for about 10 years now, and she'll say, "How old do you think I am?" And you can just see on the face of the person she's doing, I don't know exactly how to answer that question, but she persists. "How old do you think I am?" And so they're kind of looking for a way to deflect one way or another, and they'll eventually say something. And this last fall, my wife and I happened to be standing near when she asked the question, and she said, "Well, how old do you think I am?" And the person said, "Oh, gosh, Lorraine, you look like you're in your mid-60s or so." And she said, "Heavens no, my oldest daughter's older than that." She likes to throw people under the bus too. So there's times that we get stuck in these trains of thoughts and we just can't let them go at all. I mean, they just kind of grab onto us one way or the other. I thought of this as I was working through Luke chapter 12. For those of you who are new with this here, we are working our way through the book of Luke, the biography that Luke wrote about Jesus. And we are soaping each week. That means we're doing a journal. SOAP stands for Scripture, Observation, Application, and Prayer. And as we work our way through, I have noticed some nuances I've never really noticed before. And this is a situation that happened in John chapter 12. The first 11 verses of John chapter 12, Luke chapter 12, Luke weaves into his biography that there are all these big crowds that are following Jesus. As a matter of fact, he says in chapter 12, verse 1, he says, there were so many thousands of people that they were stepping on each other, listening to Jesus. And Jesus begins teaching about some very intense, tough, serious issues, persecution, the unforgivable sin, blasphemy of the Holy Spirit, heaven, hell, persecution. I mean, these were tough issues. And in the midst of this intense teaching, there's a man in the crowd who spoke up, and from the words he blurted out, you knew that he was not tracking where Jesus was. And he says, teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with him. And I'm wondering if Jesus is going, what in the world? Nothing I said relates to what you just jumped in there with, you know. Now, I've been a communicator for a number of years. For about 50 years now, I've been a teacher, preacher, communicator in some way, and I've stood up before groups both small and large, and there are times as I teach, as I talk, and I'm looking at the audience. I'm looking at you. As I look at the audience, you sometimes wonder, what in the world are they thinking? And sometimes by the questions people ask at the end of the sermon, you know, when you're out in the hallway, you know that it was nothing by which you were talking at all. You know, you get questions like, did you know that in the women's restroom on the west side, the stool is clogged? No, I did not know that. I've just been teaching for the last 30 minutes. I don't really care. I mean, you know, I'm so full of compassion in those things. But you can tell sometimes by people's questions that they're not really with it at all. And that's this guy. He was not really listening to Jesus. He wanted his problem fixed without confronting some of the deeper issues within his life. In his mind, his greedy older brother wasn't giving him his fair share of the inheritance. And so he interrupts Jesus saying, you know, I want Dad's wristwatch back. I want that in my hand. That was the ultimate question for him. And the questions revealed ultimately what this guy's trust was at. And it wasn't in God. He thinks that if he can get enough money from his inheritance, then he can get more stuff. I mean, and then he would have status and security. We like our stuff, don't we? So in verse 15, Jesus gives a warning, not just to the comment that the man made, and it wasn't just to him, it wasn't just to the crowd, but it's also to all of us here this morning. And he gives this kind of a twist, and he zeroes in on us, ourselves. Is that a statement? He zeroes in on us, and he says, watch out. He says, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. So this morning, we're going to talk about stuff. Your stuff and my stuff. Actually, we're going to talk more about your stuff because I like my stuff and I want to keep my stuff. I don't want to get rid of it because all my stuff is good stuff. Stuff is just another word for possessions, isn't it? We go on stuff survey sorties. We look for things to be able to collect and bring back to our house. We build a house and we soon run out of rooms, so we build a storage shed in the back for our stuff. Or we rent a storage shed to be able to store our stuff in. We become quite attached to our stuff. And so we go on vacations to obtain more stuff. And we fill up our car and bring the stuff back. And we have to put other stuff in the closet, move it around because our stuff is just filling up the closet. Stuff. What do we do with our stuff? What do we do with our stuff? I'm glad you asked that question. God does give us some words on what to do with our stuff. And he warns us to be careful that stuff, as it so often does, it does not own us. And so this morning, there are three things that I really want you to grasp from this passage of scripture that we're looking at. The first is, what is greed? Just exactly what is it? Because nobody ever admits that they have greed. We just like to talk about what other people's greed is all about. Secondly, what are the side effects? What are some of the side effects from greed coating our life? And third, what's the antidote? So what is greed? Let me just kind of give you a working definition from what Jesus has to say about greed. He says that greed is a never-ending desire and compulsion to get more of anything that you think will make you content. Greed is a never-ending desire or compassion to get more of anything that will make you feel content. It's a belief that if I get more, if I have more, then I'll somehow feel content, I'll feel satisfied, and I'll have some self-worth as a result of getting stuff within my life. Now, we always associate greed with somebody who's financially well off, but that's not true. It doesn't have anything to do with your finances at all. It has to do with the heart issue that we have, because the core issue of the heart is greed. It's a difficult heart issue to self-diagnose. I don't know of too many people that say, gosh, I realize that I'm greedy, you know? We don't admit that. We don't say, hello, my name is James, and I struggle with greed. We don't say that at all. Even though it's difficult to spot greed in our own life, it's not so difficult for us to spot greed in other people's lives, is it? Greed knows no socioeconomical boundaries. I've met poor people who are greedy. I've met rich people who are greedy. Greed is not a financial issue. It's a heart issue. Financial gain does not make greedy people less greedy. Financial gain or loss does not change anything, because greed emanates from the heart. It's a heart issue. Greed is a never-ending desire and compulsion to get more of anything that will make you feel content, that contributes to your self-worth. Because it's all about me. It's all about me owning something, having something, my needs. Greed says, I owe me. If you're angry at somebody, it's you owe me. Greed says, I owe me. I deserve this. I need this. I need this stuff. I need it more and more and more and more. So what are some of the side effects of this heart issue that we call greed? What happens with that? There's basically three things. Greed can lead us to be captive to its cousin, envy, within our life. It happens to a lot of church people. You park out in the parking lot out front or on the side, and as you're walking into church, you walk past somebody that's got a brand new SUV, and you're going, gosh, I wished I had that SUV. Mine's 3 years old, and I need a new SUV. Or you're walking in, and you've got 5 kids, and you see somebody that's got 8 kids, and they're all lined up, and they're walking very carefully behind each other. They're not beating on each other. They're not slapping on each other. They're not arguing with each other. And you think, what in the world's going on? I wish my kids would act that way when they come to church. That's envy. It's greed that's given way to its cousin envy. Or, wives, you come to church, it's cold, it's snowy like we had not too long ago, and you see somebody's husband who drives up underneath the porte-cochere, stops the car, gets out and walks around, opens the door and lets you out. And you think, I wish my husband would do that. Or you think, I just wish my husband wouldn't try to drive off when I'm getting out the door. You know, one of those things, you know. So greed has a cousin called envy. It leads to that issue within our life. Greed says, I owe me one way or another. Second thing is greed creates an insatiable appetite. A person whose heart is coated with greed within their life believes that he has earned the good things that have come his way. Therefore, you become determined to control those possessions and control that wealth in the way that they see fit. Greedy people, and I'm one of them. We are supersized with the deal of ownership, that sense of ownership. And unbeknownst to most greedy people, greed is actually fueled by fear. Once you peel all the excuses back, I'm saving for this, I'm saving for that, I've got to have this in case, Y2K might happen in 2024 and all the computers shut down and we're going to have 7 million gallons of water on our back porch to be able to have water during that time. Once you peel back all the excuses and the endless what-if scenarios, you discover a heart full of fear. Specifically, that fear is that God either can't or won't take care of our needs. God either can't or won't take care of my need. So greedy people set out to acquire, maintain everything they need to provide that sense of security that they're really desiring. But like all human appetites, there's never enough finances. There's never enough creature comforts. There's never enough tension to be able to satisfy. It's an insatiable appetite that we have. And Jesus uncovers the lie that fuels all greed when he says, a man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. It doesn't consist in our stuff that we accumulate. Life is not measured by the stuff that we own. But you say, gosh, Jesus, doesn't everybody know that? Doesn't everybody know that life doesn't consist by the abundance that you possess? Yes and no. Some people do, some people don't. No, not everyone knows this. And yes, there are those who believe that your life pretty much is the sum total of what you have, what you own. And many of us are more prone to this belief than we imagine within us. Some of us are prone to this belief without even realizing it within our own life. That's the reason Jesus says, beware, be on your guard. Watch over your heart with all diligence. So this enemy does not come in and deceive you. The third thing that's a side effect of greed is the I syndrome. Jesus, once he warns the people that he's talking to, he tells a parable. And he tells a parable about a rich man who has the BBS syndrome, bigger, better barn syndrome. And here's what he says. He told them a parable saying the land of rich man was very productive. Now, Jesus is in an agrarian society, and farmers know you can work hard, and most farmers that I have known down through the years, we used to live in primarily a farming area up in Illinois, they are hard workers, but they also realize that they can put in an immense amount of hard work, but they can't control everything. They cannot control the weather. Now, I know that you think Jim Giles can control the weather, but he doesn't. Isn't it amazing that weathermen get jobs and they keep them even though they're only right 30% of the time? That's just amazing to me. Maybe I'm greedy about that, I don't know. But he said that the land was very productive. And then he goes on to say this about the man. Let's go to the next one. And he began reasoning to himself, saying, I want you to count the number of times he uses the letter I, or the word I. What shall I do since I have no place to store my crops? Next verse. Then he said, this is what I will do. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and all my goods. Keep going. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry. 11 times he refers to himself, I, me, mine, my. And even he's talking about my soul a little bit later on. He's talking about myself. And so clearly, this guy has an I syndrome that he struggles with, And he doesn't really understand the fact that he is not in control with all these things. Now, the question he should have been asking is not. God clearly had provided this man with extra. But the question that he should have been asking is, Lord, what do you want me to do with the extra? Lord, what do you want me to do with the extra? I'd like for you to say that out loud. Would you just say that with me? Lord, what do you want me to do with the extra? Some of you don't like to participate in these things, so we're going to do it one more time, all right? Lord, what do you want me to do with the extra? Now, when I say that, I can see the reaction on your faces. And your face is, what extra? I have no extra. At the end of the month, there's more month than I have money. Maybe that's because of our stuff that we have decided that we have to own, and we are paying more out than what we have income. And so the extra may be there, but we have decided that stuff is more important than living on what and trusting in what God has already given us in that situation. That's how greedy people do not think, Lord, what do you want me to do with the extra? That's not what I think. Quite often, I'm the one saying, if I just had 10% more. Survey was done not long ago, and people said if I just made $200 a week more, then I would have everything that I need. $200 a week more would be about $10,000 a year more. That question was answered that way, whether a person made $30,000 a year, it's about 10 years old, that's it, or whether they made $130,000 a year. If I just made $200 a week more. When I come to a little extra, I think, when I receive a little extra, lucky me. I mean, I deserve this. This last year, I got something that I'd not had in years. I actually got money back from the IRS. Something was definitely wrong. Because for me, I plan to be able to, at the end of the year, owe them about $100. Because I don't want them using my money and earning interest off of it. I can have all that. Does that sound a little greedy? Yeah, I think it's very good planning personally, but that's a greedy heart also. So I got some money back. What do I do with the extra? What do I do with the extra? How can I plan with that? I mean, after all, I earned it, I deserve it, and so should I store it up? That's exactly what the landowner decided to do. He had the BBS syndrome, bigger barn syndrome. He said, I'm going to go rent a storage unit. No, I'm going to renovate the barns that I have and make a bigger barn so I can keep all my stuff. So keep in mind, greed is always looking for something good to hide behind. Greed is always looking for something good to hide behind. I'll do this good thing and I'll hide behind it and I can still be greedy. And so this guy, there's nothing wrong with him planning for the future. He has now all the needs he has for years to come. Nothing wrong with that. Thanks to disciplined planning and opportunistic savings, his kids won't have to take care of him in his old age. And so if the story ended here, we might consider this man a role model. But the story doesn't end there. Nobody's story ends there. While it's true that the landowner planned ahead, he just didn't plan far enough ahead. He was right, you know. He did need to consider his future, but not in the way he thought. He was presuming on years he did not have coming to him. Just as he had overlooked God, the God factor in evaluating his good agricultural fortune, the landowner overlooked the God factor when counting how many years he had left. And he assumed, listen to me, he assumed the abundance of his stuff assured him the many, many more years that he had left. But actually, the two didn't have any relationship at all. No connection whatsoever. Did he lose it? No, it lost him. Just after this man gets off the phone to come renovate his barn, have the barn people come in and build a bigger, better barn, he got some startling news. You're going to die tonight. Die tonight. And he soon learned the hard way that his life is not equivalent to his stuff. He will run out of time before he will run out of stuff. As it turns out, he is more dependent on God than he realized, for he's entirely reliant upon God for his allotment of time. It's too bad he didn't see that. He was equally dependent upon God for his allotment of stuff. When God delivers the bad news, he asks the landowner a question that is loaded with implication for every one of us. He says this, but God said to him, not supposed to call anybody a fool these days, it's not politically correct, but it may be relevant, may be true. You fool. In other words, you're stupid. This very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? Who will get what you prepare for yourself? He didn't just lose his life because he was rich in stuff. He lost his life and he had nothing else to do with this stuff. So who will get what you prepared for your stuff? And the answer to that question is obvious. Who's going to get your stuff when you die? Someone else. Someone else will end up with everything that he has earned. Someone else will end up with everything you have earned and consequently you deserved, and therefore you stored up the stuff. Someone else will end with all the stuff that he hoarded for himself instead of depending upon God's provision. And so in the end, all of his stuff is going to be distributed to others. It's going to be distributed not because he's generous, but because he is dead. It has a direct dependency on that. So Jesus directs our attention to an obvious but overlooked reality. Eventually, everything we claim to own will be owned by somebody else. In the end, it will be given away. So to assume that everything that comes our way is for our own consumption is short-sighted and it's stupid. It's not a matter if somebody will get it, it's a matter when and how they will get it. Either way, we'll give it away while we have time, or it'll be given away when our time runs out. So Jesus closes the parable with a pretty stern warning again in verse 21. He says, "This is how it will be with anyone who stores up things for himself but is not rich toward God." Being rich towards God is Jesus' talk for being generous towards that which advances the kingdom of God. A greedy person is one who saves his stuff carefully but gives sparingly. What Jesus is trying to convey is what will happen to you and will happen to me if we are generous savers, but we're not generous givers. Now, what is going to happen to you and I if we are generous savers, but not generous givers? All of our stuff will go to somebody else. It will not be ours anymore. We'll have no use for it because we are dead, right? Now, is that the moral of the story that Jesus is trying to tell us, that we're all going to die sometimes? No. That's pretty much a given, isn't it? Is it that God's going to strike us with an unexpected death? I don't think that's it either. I know a few generous people who have died unexpectedly. I also know some very old greedy people who, to the chagrin of their greedy relatives, they just keep right on living. If you don't think that's humorous, think about that one again. The real key to this parable is this: those whose eagerness to store up material goods outpace their willingness to give will suffer a complete and total loss when their time runs out. The landowner didn't just lose his life, he lost everything he considered life. He was rich in stuff, but poor towards God, because everything that came his way, he thought was for his own private consumption. In the 80s sometime, there was a guy by the name of McCracken. He wrote a book called The Second Neurotic Notebook. I guess his other book that he wrote was The First Neurotic Notebook. But he made this statement that I thought was kind of interesting on it. You've heard it said, the robber comes up to you, sticks a gun to your head, and you says, "Your money or your life." What do you do in that situation? You reach in your pocket and you give him the billfold because you don't want to get shot on the spot. It's true, you want your life more than you want to have your money on you. Now, some of you are thinking that, hey, I could be just like James Bond or something, and I can tear that gun out of the guy's hand, and I'll do it. In general, what happens then? You end up getting shot in the head or something of that nature. So he says, so McCracken says, we know what to do when a burglar makes this demand of us, but we don't know what to do when God makes that demand of us. What are you going to do with your stuff? What are you going to do with your stuff? What do you do with your extra? What do you do with your stuff? So, what is the antidote to being greedy? What is the antidote for being greedy? The parable of the rich fool does at least two things for us. One, it defines greed from God's perspective. And second, it gives a very simple remedy. The problem with God's definition is that it's broader than what we're comfortable with, but his antidote is unavoidably practical. The antidote is a habit that has the power to free us from greed-ridden hearts. Let me say that again, all right? The antidote is a habit that has the power to deliver us from greed-ridden hearts. I think it's a common problem that everybody has, right? I've never, as I said before, never have met anybody come up to me and say, "Hi, my name is James and I'm greedy." We don't think that we are. We can recognize it in somebody else's life, but we do not recognize it well in our own. So, what is this antidote? What is it that can break that power? So here's the question. Why do I have so much? Well, in our consumer-driven culture, it keeps us laser focused upon what we don't have. We focus on what we don't have, and that leaves our hearts vulnerable to greed. As long as I am focused on more, then when more comes along, I will assume it's for who? Me. It's supposed to be for me. So when I'm focused on more, then when it comes along, I just assume that I'm physically supposed to consume that. As long as I'm living for the next purchase, for the next upgrade, the next whatever, I'm consuming mentally physically what I'm getting ready to possess. And that kind of attitude leaves us with little margin for generosity. So why has God provided you with more? Why has he provided me with more than I need? If that makes you uncomfortable, consider this. When you don't have enough, what do you do? When you don't have enough, what do you do? I can tell you what I do. First thing I do is I go to God and say, "God, there's this need. I'm relying on you. Would you fill this need?" I've got to tell you, as pastor of this congregation, there isn't a week go by that I'm not praying about the finances of this congregation. That's just the reality of my own life. This is what we need, Father. Would you please provide it? So if I'm willing to pray about when I don't have more, am I willing to pray about when I have more? Do I ever say, "God, you've blessed me with this. What do you want me to do with it? What is it what need is there that you want me to have?" Now, if you're like me, I expect God to provide when I pray for him. So now I'm on the other side and I have more than I need, not more than I want, but more than I need. That's where the greed comes in. So I'm on the other side. Why don't I ask God about that? And if God has blessed you with more than you need, it's so that you can share your more with those who have need. And embracing that simple fact is the key to ridding your heart of greed. Greed is conquered by generosity. Hear me? Greed is conquered by generosity. Generous giving will break the greed grip on your life. So whether or not you think you have extra, give extra. Give generously. Years ago, when I was in college, the dean of our college, a little 5'2" man who wore wide-rimmed glasses, who scared everybody in class every time because he demanded so much of you, said this, and I can remember it was in a Life of Christ class, and I wrote it down, and I've never forgotten it. He said this: "So whether or not you think you have extra, and give generously. You've got to give to the point that it impacts your lifestyle. Otherwise, it will never affect your greed." Because it is my desire to have stuff that expands my lifestyle. And I've got to have more, and I've got to have more. But if I give to the point that it impacts my lifestyle, then I have to drive back my lifestyle up some. Somebody says, well, it says that God loves a cheerful giver, and I'm not very cheerful when I'm not getting what I want. Dr. Wilson would say, give anyway, it'll cheer you up sooner or later. The giving, you just give till you get cheerful in the whole situation. Give till it impacts your lifestyle. And I know that's strong. And it's harsh, but it's true. Don't wait until God changes your heart to begin giving. Giving is the way God chooses to change your heart. Give until you get cheerful. The antidote to greed is that our giving must impact our lifestyle if it's going to break the power of greed. Now, God has given us two concrete ways to break the power of greed. The first is percentage giving. I don't know about you, what you do with yours, but in order to help control my greed, I get paid twice a month. And so when I get paid, there's a certain percentage that I have prayed about, talked about with God about, that God has convicted me that this is the percentage that I need to give back to him. And so the first thing I do when I receive my paycheck is I write a check. I know that's old-fashioned, but I've got to see it out in print that this is what I'm doing, and I'm committed to that issue. It may be that you give online. That's a great thing. You can do it that way. But for me, if I don't see it, it's not impacting me with the realization that this is a covenant that I have made with God about that, percentage giving. Now, I don't care what your percentage is. I know in the Old Testament it says 10%. New Testament is that you give generously. That is the program that God talks about, that Jesus talks about. So if 10% is too harsh for you right now, try giving 3%. Give 4%. Give 4% for a year and then bump it to 5%. Give 5% for a year and then bump it to 6%. Give 10% until you realize it's not impacting my lifestyle. Give 12% or 15% or whatever it may be. Give till it impacts your lifestyle. Give a percentage. That's the first way. The second way, I believe, is spontaneous giving. When you see a need, when you have a need, you pray, asking God to meet that need, right? And when God does that, he prompts someone who has more to be able to give to that need. And so when you have a need, you see a need, then give to meet that need. It may be God's prompting to say, spontaneously, you can give out of what you have. You may not be able to meet the whole need, but you can give part of it. So spontaneously plan to do that. When we have extra come in, I already know that there's a percentage of that I'm going to put over into the Give When Needed fund. And then when I hear a need, then I can be able to give that at that time. I know that's what God desires for me to do. So in order to break the greed power in your life, practice generosity. Generosity by giving a percentage of gift. Generosity by giving a spontaneous gift back to God. Something that will help his kingdom, something that helps meet a need within your life. Those two habits, percentage giving and spontaneous giving, will protect you from the bigger barn syndrome. And the day will come when you receive an unexpected windfall and your thoughts will be not with, what can I spend this on, but it's, who can I help? What will advance the kingdom? What kingdom endeavor can I fund? And in that moment, you will know that the habit of generous giving has broken the power of greed in your life. It's a habit that changes everything. Jesus also said this, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal, where banks go bankrupt. Oh, that's not in there. Are you trusting in the banks? But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moth will not and rust do not destroy, where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Dr. David Livingstone, I'm sure you've heard stories about him. He was a medical doctor from England who came to Christ and decided that God did not want him to just enjoy his medical practice in England, but to go and take the knowledge that God has given him and the skill and go to an unreached people group. And for him, that was in Africa. And he goes into Africa, into a place where they had not seen a European person at all in their entire life. And so he walks into these tribes and begins using his skills that God has given him. He invested his life in that. And he urged other people to come and work with him and to support that mission that they did. And they made a tremendous impact on several different tribes that warred with each other for centuries. They began to come together after they received the peace of Christ within their heart. And one day he contracted one of their diseases and he died. And as his family came from England to box up his body and bring it back to England, the natives first said, "May we have a moment." And they went in and they cut Dr. Livingstone's heart out of his cavity and took it to the center of their village and buried it, because they said, this is where Dr. Livingstone's heart was. His treasure is in the people he invested in, and we want his heart here in Africa. My question is, where would they bury your heart? They bury it at the office? That's where I spend most of my time. Will they bury it with your stuff in a storage locker? Will they bury it in your savings account? Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. One of the most famous verses, people know it even though they have no contact with Christianity generally, is John 3:16 and 17. For God so loved the world that he what? Gave. That he gave. He gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes on him should not perish, but have everlasting life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. Where's your heart? Is it on the things and kingdom of your world? Or is your heart set upon the kingdom of God? Don't allow the emotion of greed to constrict your heart. Learn to walk with God and give. If this morning you have not given your heart and life to Jesus Christ, we want to give you that opportunity. There will be some decision guides or coaches on each side, the left and right side of the auditorium. They would love to talk with you, converse with you. Maybe there's other issues that you have. Maybe this whole thing about greed has exposed some things, and that Jesus is warning to beware, be on your guard against all kinds of greed, has stirred up some things within your life that you may need to pray with someone else about. Whatever that need is, we invite you to come as we stand and sing together.